So I stepped away for a bit, recharged my batteries, got my eyes straight, got them recharged, and came back and went through the image and just looked for anything that I thought was distracting or looked like a mistake, and I marked it up. I created a layer called markup, and I just went through with a brush and just started marking things that I saw. So I wanted to think about this like the client would. When they pop open this image with their fresh eyes, what are they going to see that's distracting to them? Because from my point of view, I've been totally head down in this image for a long time, and I want them to just see my beautiful, phenomenal artistic creation that I'm so proud of. They open this up and they see a bunch of distracting stuff or things that look like mistakes. They're going to completely fixate in on that stuff, and they're not going to really engage with all of my fantastic artistic stuff that I did. And that's the worst case scenario. So that's why we do this markup at the end, to remove any of those distracting elements, give them immediate access to the beauty of the image that we created. All right, I'm going to get started right in on the background. I'm going to turn off that high pass that I created because I want to go in and work on the pixels again. I'm going to go back into my frequency separation because I know I'm going to be doing a lot of pixel work, and thank goodness we've got this magical new system with the mixer brush tool, because I can knock this stuff out super quick without even having to worry about too much cloning or anything like that. So I'm going to turn off the markup layer just so I can see what I'm doing. Hit the mixer brush, full throttle. I'm going to bring the spacing down a bit. If you see that jittery stuff, that means your spacing's too high. Now look at that, just wiped right out of there. It's pretty amazing. Do the same thing with this boat. I'm going to switch over to the non-pressure sensitive brush. Just do a shift click horizontally because I know I have this horizontal element of the horizon here, and this just lets me make straight line swipes really easy. All right, tugboat's gone. Let's deal with this sailboat here. Once again, this is the power of Mixer Brush in a frequency separation workflow, because it makes it so easy to just clean up elements like this that are out of focus. Now, what I want to do is keep track of these changes too. So I'm going to go back into my brush, set it to 100%, pick a different bright color, and I just initial the stuff that I did. That way I know I don't need to go back and do it again. Let me make sure I've got that all taken care of on the highs too. Yeah, there's a little bit left here. Got to make sure we don't forget that. And once again, you can be really liberal with where you sample from, since we've already separated this. Let's get rid of this cloud. And this. Yeah, I don't see any detail on the high for those elements, so that's cool. This is a good point to talk about. I mean, because I mentioned before how I like to separate tasks out, because I don't want to overload myself with thinking about too much at once, or in a nonlinear fashion, or non-compartmentalized fashion. Benefit of being able to do this cleanup so quickly is that I've done my markup. So it's like I've taken care of that type of cognitive work initially on the front end, and therefore now that I move on to the step where I'm actually doing the cleanup, I don't have to think in that mode anymore. It really frees me up to just focus on one type of task at a time, and I find that is an incredible stress reliever in terms of workflow for me, and it helps me be much more thorough and much more precise when I'm especially when I'm finishing really technical cleanup like this. Yeah, so while watching me work here, I mean, you can see why we really got to hand it to the mixer brush. It's a pretty amazing tool, and it's pretty simple actually. In the concept of what it does is essentially the best metaphor is that it's finger painting. Basically, what I'm doing is just moving pixels around from one location to another. And since this background is really nice and soft, and especially since we've got it separated from any high frequency information above it, it's particularly well suited to be able to manipulate the background information in a way that you can't see any edges or errors or anything like that, because it's all nice and soft anyway. I mean, you can see how I just took a bunch of soft background information and completely removed that architecture. Should be noted too, though, that you don't have to stick with the mixer brush, even though it works great. But in this area here, this green is getting a little bit mushy, or it's kind of getting mixed together just as one tone. And over here on the edge of the tree, we have some nice lighter values that give a sense of volume. So I can switch to the regular brush, make sure got a soft brush, and lower the opacity a bit, but I can bring back in some of the brighter tones that I see over here in the tree, and then switch back to mixer brush and move them around and blend them in a little bit. So these are essentially painting tools, and what we're doing is essentially painting, but the beautiful thing is on a frequency separated workflow, you don't have to be, some great painter or some great draftsperson. You can just work in this way and push pixel information around just like you're finger painting. If it's out of focus like this, if it's on the low layer, it's almost always going to be out of focus, because that's what we like, is that separation. So it makes you free, it frees you up completely to use this tool in a really fast, general way, and all you care about is this really abstract notion of what's constructing the final image. A really, really blurry layer and a really, really sharp layer. So thinking in that abstracted sense of what creates your entire image is going to put you miles ahead in terms of being able to control each of those components and manipulate those really quickly. So I can't stress this enough, this concept about thinking about your image in an abstract manner. Up here, I was not painting a tree. I was just painting a blob of green. Down here, I'm not painting boards. I'm just moving around gray pixel information. Here, I'm not painting a, whatever this is, anchor object. That's probably not the technical term, but it's an object, but I'm not looking at it like the specific object that it is. I'm looking at it as an abstract collection of pixels. And if you can switch your brain into that mode where you're just thinking about how can I make more efficient or streamline this collection of pixels, you're going to be able to attack all of these problems in such a different way that frees you up from the constraints of what an object is. You are just looking at purely abstract compositional elements, colors, lights and darks, that create form. And with a few quick strokes of the mixer brush, I honestly don't even care what it's called. I just made it the most beautiful, whatever it's called, in known to mankind. I've just smoothed it out because I know just to look for general imperfections, abstract ideas of imperfections, and I don't even need to know what it is. I can make it really beautiful. So the mixer brush is what allows me to push that information around in a really easy way without caring too much about very specifics of detail. Yeah, so I'm kind of going off script here a little bit and cleaning up things that I didn't necessarily mark up. That's okay, but rule of thumb, it's usually good to stick with the game plan, I would say. Whether it's yours or your client's. All right, so you've probably been watching this get worse and worse in terms of performance on my computer. Now, that's because the file is getting huge, okay? You got to expect this to happen at some point, but I'm going to show you how to get around it. It's time to simplify just a little bit. This is probably going to happen to you if you follow this system exactly and create as complex a file as we have here. It's fantastic for flexibility and editability, but once your computer starts to lag, it makes it almost impossible to keep working because it's just so hard to wait for cursors to change or stuff to show up in your file. So I'm going to show you how to whittle it down just a little bit, so hopefully we can shave off some file size. I'm going to go into the athlete group. I'm going to go into the base and start tossing these base smart objects that I used in my liquefies. So for the back shoe and the front shoe, I got to leave those because I didn't split those. I didn't do a frequency separation on those. But anything that's under a frequency separation, like right here in my tights group, I've got my separation, which basically duplicates this up in the frequency set. And if I throw away that base smart object, I'll shave off a little bit of file size, and it won't affect anything visually. I just won't be able to return to that smart object that contains the raw file later. So you're going to want to save out this simplified version as like a V2. Into the shorts, ditch that. Arms, go to the bottom, ditch that smart object. Shirt, we can throw that away. And all the way down to the background, the smart object at the bottom, let's throw that away too. Save this file out. It's underscore V2. All right, cool. This shaved off some file size. We're back down to under 4.5 gigs on the working file. This should definitely improve performance. So let's keep working on the background layer in my frequency separation stack. Let's check out what's going on with the markup so we can remember where we came from here. I'm going to clean up the bottom edge on this thing here on the high. Just going to kind of trim it down. It's not a very important. Yeah, it's a little tricky aligning that base edge. I'm going to go back into the low, switch to the old mixer brush, and kind of trim that edge down a little bit so it looks a little bit more real. I'm going to put the mixer brush on a low opacity. Might surprise you, but you can even use mixer brush on the high. I didn't like all the crunchiness on the edge of that line. I'll undo so you can see it. And all I did was just shift click at a lower opacity with the mixer brush on the high, and it just kind of smoothed that line out. So I like that. A little bit of residual here from that thing that we wiped out. And that post that got removed. All right, let's keep moving. I want to keep adding my initials to markups that I've completed. That one was low opacity. I'm going to do a little bit more cleanup on this shadow. I'm going to switch to the regular brush, sample some of the darker tone here from the toe because I kind of want, I'll match that. And a little bit lower opacity, like 60%. And I can really make a quick shadow. Just softening the edge there a bit. And I'm going to use the stamp tool, a little bit lower opacity, just to bring some of this texture back into this area where it got a little bit soft. I'm finished with most of my markup that I did on the background, and now I'm going to move into the athlete and hopefully wrap this up real quick and get this off to the client for first round. So, seeing some edges up here on the hair. I know this got introduced when I really brightened up on the grade. So I'm going to see if I can't just trim out a little bit more on the low layer of the separation in the base. See how that starts to fill in that hair mask that I created earlier. That's some easy stuff to miss because lots of times you'll set up some really nice masking, and later once you do the grade, you do some big luminosity shifts. Edges sometimes show up where you don't expect them to. And since we've got this stuff all broken out, on the downside, we start having processor problems. Once the file gets really big, it can be a little bit tricky to manage, but I can always go back and I can make changes like this. If I see weird edges, I can just do it really quick. So I'm going to add some grain to the shirt here. On a new layer, I'm going to draw a marquee selection just around the shirt. And on this new layer that I'm calling grain, I'm going to hit Shift F5 to fill. Fill that with 50% gray. I'm going to set it to overlay and then filter noise, add noise. I'm going to set it to monochromatic, zoom in just so I can get a closer look. Okay, that's some crazy grain. Let's move it back down to like 5. Maybe we'll push it up a bit higher to like 8. Click OK. Now that looks pretty crazy. It's a little bit tight, a little bit crisp. I'm going to hit Command T to scale and just scale that up to get it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to reduce the opacity way down on that. I'm going to do the same thing on top of that. Call that grain 2. Cruise back in. Add some more noise. Maybe at 5. Reduce that down in opacity just a bit too. Starts to give it a little bit better surface. That sits in there a lot nicer. One thing I think I might do is just give it a little bit of a blur, because it's a touch sharp. Okay, I'm just going to blur the bottom one. The sharp one I'm going to leave as is. Now, I want to make a little bit of a color change here. I think that the value between the shirt and the arm back here is probably pretty good, but the arm is a little bit too red, and I think that's separating it from the shirt, so I'm going to see if I can bring that down just a bit. That's the thing to often look for. Things sometimes desaturate in dark areas, and if we do a lot of color treatment, can create unrealistic higher saturation in shadow areas. That connects a lot better in there. I'm going to darken the shirt down just a touch in there. And the arm too, just a bit. right, cool. That was pretty much my last pixel edit. You can see how super intense that was, but it really helped to have that markup to follow, so I didn't have to think about doing it. I could just cruise and just hit all my marks, make sure everything's checked off, and then I'm done. So I had one more note there, which was the color, the contrast overall. So I'm gonna throw that in to the background real quick. My value, bring up a new curve. I kind of want to hold on to the quarter tones, the brighter values, but these areas here, yeah, kind of in the mid-tones, I'd like to darken. Let's see what that looks like before and after. Maybe slightly less. Cool, that's looking good. Now I can't forget to redo my high passes because that's what's giving that added drama, added snap at the end. But I went through and made all these changes, so I had to turn them off. But I'll show you the magic of using Smart Object in this case because I don't have to do any thinking. I've already got that set up. I can just flatten up, create a new Smart Object, and apply my settings. It's really quick. I just duplicated that group and merged that up. Convert it to a Smart Object. On my big high pass that I had done before, I can just drag the smart filters onto that Smart Object I just created, drag the mask onto, check the values. It's 80% soft light, so my new one needs to be 80% soft light too. And I can throw the old one away. Let's be sure to name that big HP. You can call it BKG, so we know that that's the background high pass. Gives it that nice punch. And I'm going to redo the one for the athlete too. All right, it's been a long road to get to this point. I finished my additional edits that I marked up after I spent some time away from the image. And to me, that's above and beyond what most retouchers will do for a round one. And I'm ready to send this off for approval. And before I do that, I'm gonna do a couple finishing moves just to tie the room together on this one. I'll show you what they are. I often talk about the surface of an image. We're always so deep in it that we don't think about that front of the image that's closest to us. And doing something to reinforce that will always create more unity in all the different stuff that you messed with on the way to get here. So to create a more unified surface, A, I can use color, and B, I can use some kind of texture or something that just brings everything right up front. First thing I'm going to do is just a cheap and easy little trick that works really well and is also non-destructive. I'm going to use a photo filter. Now, I don't use photo filters for major effects or anything like that. I just use it right at the end sometimes to just create some hint of a continuous color throughout every part of the image. It's just a touch. I'll bring up a warming filter in this case and bring the density down to like 10 or 12. What that's done is just added a touch of warm through all the middle and light tones of the image. Last thing I'm going to do is bring up my trusty grain action and drop some grain on top of the entire image to give it a slight tooth and a unifying textural element that goes across everything. Now this is barely perceptible. Here, it might be a little bit too strong, so I'm going to go into my camera raw filter, go to the grain, and drop the amount down, something like 18. Hit OK. Now that's a nice, subtle, unifying surface that you can see brings each element of the image together to the same quality. All right, this image is complete. What I like to do right now is go back and look where I've come from. Look at the original. Not just to revel in the amazing transformation, but to look at the steps that I went through, because those are lessons. Those are lessons that I can take with me to the next image that I retouch. Going back to the original, you can see what a huge transformation happened. I never could have conceived of this final image just by looking at the original one. I had to go through step by step to really realize what this final image was going to be. So let me actually take you through step by step so we can see all the individual challenges that we met and questions that we answered. First, we dropped in the shoes. Not a huge artistic step forward, but it was a technical thing we had to take care of. Then, clean the athlete, shape him, and make that incremental step forward in quality. Clean the background. Now that's a pretty big step too. Look at how the image and the message, more importantly, became that much more clear once we cleaned up all those distracting elements from the background. It's a pretty big deal. And then another big step forward, changing the color on the athlete's apparel. And then the critical final step, taking this relatively flat, mid-range image and applying mood and grade in its final polish.